Hey, Bishop. This is Mitch. He's the new guy.
Mitch, I want you to do a couple things for me. First, I want you to observe very closely your surrounding today. Take everything in. Leave no mental stone unturned. Can you do that for me, Mitch? Good. Then, I want you to think about what your life would be like if you'd have been born blind.
Thanks, Bishop.
Hey everybody, how you doing? Welcome back to I Bought a Microphone. So, I'm going to share an experience that I had a couple of days ago, and then I'm going to talk about it, the way I feel about it. So, back in the, a couple years ago, I was a fan of the movie Waiting. It was one of my favorite comedies. Ryan Reynolds, kind of early in his career, establishing himself as a really solid comedic presence. Justin Long putting in kind of a good performance. It was, I was right in my 20s. I was exactly where Justin Long was. Having absolutely no idea what I was going to do with my life, knowing I didn't want to go to college, but knowing that I didn't want to work at a fucking restaurant for the rest of my life. So, what are we going to do? Where do we go from here? So, it was kind of a relevant movie for me. And also, it's pretty fucking funny. Some great performances. Fucking Luis Guzman is always entertaining as far as I'm concerned. And the aforementioned actors. Anna Faris does a great job. I mean, they're all, and a young Andy Milonakis, fresh off the Man Show fame, trying to establish a name for himself. So it's a pretty good movie, and honestly, it still holds up. But there was a moment when I was watching it where I caught myself. Like, the movie came out, I believe, in 2007, which was 12 years ago, and was not the same world that we live in right now. And they were talking about The Game. And if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't, I will explain it. Because it's not The Game you're thinking of. BT dub, if you were thinking of it, you just lost. But if you're not, the game that they're referring to in that show is, so you reveal your genitalia to somebody. There's variations that they show. You can squeeze your balls and it's the brain. You can stretch the skin of your balls out and it's the bat wing, or you can do various other things. And if they see that, you get to kick them on the ass and you get to berate them for being a faggot. And, I had kind of an unexpected reaction to that. I mean, I don't... what to say? I mean, like, it's something that I don't know would be in a film in this day and age. It's definitely not woke, to show someone your balls and then make fun of them and call them gay as if that's something to be ashamed of, right? I caught myself, too, which was the more interesting part of it and what I really want to talk about, all right? So, I used to love this movie, and that part of it never even entered into it. And as I used to call things gay as a way of a euphemism for lame. I used to do that. I've struggled and chosen not to do that and force myself not to do that. I don't call things retarded anymore. All these things that we, as members of polite society, certain people don't like certain things. So we try to adapt ourselves. We try to change our behavior so that those people aren't offended, so they don't feel uncomfortable. Because, you don't want to be that asshole that, well, I guess some people do, but, most of us don't want to be that asshole that makes somebody else feel left out or, not part of what's going on here or, feel lesser than because they're a certain thing that we're, choosing to make fun of at the moment. And that was the moment I had. I was like, oh, well, Jesus. That's, a little dated, is the thought that came into my mind. But also, at the same time, I was like, why do I even care? This is 2007 morality. Is the movie no longer funny now? Do I have to stop watching it because I just suddenly felt uncomfortable by something that I once thought, didn't even think twice about? And the answer, of course, was no. And I didn't stop watching, and the movie progressed, and it's actually very funny, though it is not written by somebody who has a lot of respect for homosexuals. I can say that. So, does that make the movie bad? And should we no longer watch the movie just because, it has things in it that, from a modern or, more modern perspective, we would frown upon? And again, I say no. I still think the movie's funny. I would couch it by saying, if somebody was to watch it, I would say, hey, this movie's 12 years old, so, but there's still some good shit in it. And, that's seems to be a lot now of, people going backwards. Not as if there's not enough to be outraged about now. Not enough terrible things going on now that we should all be paying attention to and be worried about. It seems like a lot of people are going back to the past and yelling about terrible shit about that. Molly Ringwald's revisit of The Breakfast Club and all the problematical things that are going on in that movie. And is that necessarily where we should be focusing our attentions? And, are things that are no longer, up to our modern standards of propriety or whatever, are they entirely without merit? And should we entirely disregard them? I remember, I can't remember who it was, and I'm not a guy that's on Twitter, but I did read a story about this. Some guy quoted Churchill. Did a quote from Churchill that was pretty apt, I think, for this situation. Can't remember what he was complaining about, but Churchill's got a lot of good quotes. And, he got torn apart by people because Churchill was supposedly a racist and, didn't believe in he believed in the superiority of white people over brown people, and was not a fan of the, Indian separation from the British Empire, and saw that, colored people should be subjugated, by the white race, and things like that, which I don't think we should, ignore. And I think if somebody was quoting his racist passages, then we can speak out about the terrible things, about that. But Churchill did do some good things for the world. He got England, led England through probably one of its worst periods in known history, and I think we can all agree if England had collapsed, Europe might look a lot different now than it does. The maps might be drawn slightly different. I don't think Hitler would have taken over the world, but he might have been able to hold on to a sizable chunk of Europe if he didn't have England to worry about. So, and just because... Yeah, so the irony of this, oh my god. Like, I looked at... This is the fucking story that I'm talking about. I looked it up. So, in victory, magnanimity. Magnanimity. That's a hard word to say. So don't be a dick, in victory. That's what World War I taught us. This was... So, Scott Kelly, who's a fucking astronaut, for God's sakes, he quotes fucking Churchill and gets all kinds of hell. It doesn't... Does the source matter? If prose moves you, if it inspires goodness in you, if it creates, something, if it stirs something inside you, and it echoes something within you that you can't possibly put into words. Does the source really matter? Does the fact that Abraham Lincoln, didn't necessarily cotton to black people as much as, he should have, undo the fact that he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation and then he fought the Civil War and, tried to free those people? Supposedly he, didn't think that black people and white people should live together, but he still fought for their freedom, right? So that's, nobody's perfect. We're all terrible, and we've all done some bad things. Harvey Weinstein is a piece of shit, and I don't care about the horrible things that happened to him. He happened to produce a lot of movies that I like, including the works of Kevin Smith, who, did some of his early work I'm a big fan of. Because Harvey Weinstein's a piece of shit and he earned money off of those projects, am I supposed to boycott that stuff now? Like, where the fuck is the line drawn? Like, and what... So Harvey Weinstein wasn't actually... He's just a producer. He didn't write or direct those movies. So we can still watch those. But if the people who wrote or directed movies had things in them that were, considered acceptable for the time, but by our modern standards are no longer acceptable, well, then we have to completely ignore, erase that whole piece of work that whole person's contribution to our culture should just be expunged because they weren't perfect and they were a product of their time. Do you see where I'm going with this? Like, I like to think I'm woke as much as the next guy. I mean, I'm not perfect. I acknowledge I have my own prejudices. Most of them involve white people, BT dubs, but I mean, I have a lot of prejudices, and I don't express them or live my life by them, but I do acknowledge that they exist. But I don't think that that taking something, I think, okay, let me say it this way. Taking something out of context. For example, taking a quote from Winston Churchill that inspires you, proclaiming it as, this is how I feel right now. This quote. All right? Does not mean that you support all of Winston Churchill's racist doctrines. It does not also mean that the quote itself by Winston Churchill is somehow meaningless because he also said a bunch of terrible things. Right? We can separate the art from the artist. We do it all the time. I can appreciate the works of Mel Gibson and the acting that he does and not support his opinions on the Jewish people. Okay? He's a good actor. He's a good director. Not necessarily a great humanitarian. Now, some would say, you don't agree with his politics, you shouldn't support his art. But we're not talking about just one person. Mel Gibson is a cog in a machine. And there's all sorts of people that suffer if we boycott Mel Gibson movies. Because there's thousands of people that work to make those movies. Well, thousands is, probably an exaggeration. There's hundreds. There's hundreds of people that work to make those movies come together. All right? So, which is the greater evil, then? Supporting a movie by somebody whose politics you don't necessarily support? Or boycotting a movie and taking food out of the mouths of the children of the people who worked to make that movie because you happen to not like what somebody said once? And, that's that moment. That's that situation. And this is now. I'm talking about now. Would I watch a movie with Mel Gibson in it? Yeah, I probably still would. Would I quote Winston Churchill if it's a good quote? Yes, I would. Not the quotes on, his feelings about brown people. Obviously. Because I don't share those beliefs. Do I think that Winston Churchill was a bad person? I don't know. Probably he was. I mean, most leaders are, to an extent. You have to be a piece of shit to a certain extent to rise to power. Because you have to first not give a fuck what anybody else cares about. To rise to power, you have to be able to say, those people over there are the worst people in the world, and I don't care about them. You people who support me, you're the greatest people in the world, and I will do everything that I can to rise you up. And that's Matt's politics lesson in 5 seconds. Like, that's it. That's my understanding of it, and, seems to be the case for the most part. Okay, but let's bring it back around. We're not talking about politics. Politics comes into it, but we're talking about art. We're talking about movies. We're talking about music made by people who are flawed who are not perfect, might be pieces of shit. Nobody knows. I mean, what happens behind closed doors? It's all blah, 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 blah. So anyway, is an entertaining movie still entertaining if it's perhaps dated? I like to go back to the example of Blazing Saddles, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. Absolutely no way in the fucking world that movie would ever be made today. Nobody's got the balls to do anything like that. Like, you look at all the horrible fucking violence and, disgusting fucking horror movies that are made and, like all the things. But a comedy about race where people use the word nigger constantly? No. Yeah, white people using that word. Never be done again. Ever. Is it in poor taste? Is it terrible? Honestly, I think the black-white stuff, the use of the N-word, I think it's fine. I'm a white guy, so I can say that and not be right. But, I mean, as a white person in the 2000s, I have a hypersensitivity to racism. I want to make sure before I open my mouth that I'm not going to be perceived as racist, just as a, just that's because that's the world that I live in now. I have to be hypersensitive to that stuff. I mean, I guess I don't have to. I could be a regular Joe Blow and not care about, what, but I want to. Let me say that. I don't want to fucking hurt anybody. I don't want to alienate anybody. I don't want to fucking do anything that's, too dickish. So, I mean, from that standpoint, from my point of view now in this place and time, I think, fucking Blazing Saddles holds up, stands the test of time. I don't think it would be made today. I think so there is care taken in that movie to, show the racism that pervades America and was shown to African Americans of that time. In a way, I think what his, intention was to show that, these people weren't bad people, they just didn't know any better. That's the way of the world, and that's what it was like back then. And that's, I mean, it's shocking to us now because we don't walk around talking like that. We actually whisper it under our breaths, and, we laugh at each other behind our napkins, and we stare and point. But, I mean, that from his point of view in the 70s, that's the world that he lived in. They were more overt about it back then, but sensibilities haven't changed. But their sensitivity to African Americans does not extend to homosexuals, nor does it extend to Native Americans. And that's, where it all falls apart, obviously. But in the end, it all breaks apart, and it's, it's not we see that it's actually a movie, and it's a facade. We're all looking at. It's none of it's real. It's all, which is, I think, where the movie ties it together in the end. All the derision and all the horrible things that have happened up until this point, they're put aside, and the two heroes ride off together into the sunset in a limousine. But still, right off into the sunset. And, is it dated? Yes. Is it problematic? Yes. Is it a bad film? Absolutely not. Is it still entertaining Does it still have value? Yes, it does. I mean, this harkens back to my very second episode. You know, when I was complaining about The Flash and him being cast by characters who didn't look like the character. That was, of course, a superficial argument, and is not completely necessary, you know, for a character to look like the character if they can embody the ideals of that character. Though, once again, I will say, Aquaman, what the fuck? Wonder Woman's not blonde. And Captain Marvel's not a brunette, so what the fuck? Where's my blonde Barry Allen? WTF. So, in the day and age that we live, we need to be cognizant of the way our words affect people. I'm fine with that. That's the world that I live in, and I'll do my best. I'm not perfect, and I may sometimes say something that offends somebody, but I'm trying, so I think that should, you know, at least grant credence to the fact that I'm not a terrible person. The fact that I've said some terrible things, you know, I'm not a Winston Churchill, all right? That being said, things that were done before now should not be judged by now's standards. Works of art, you gotta understand not just the work of art itself and appreciate it for what it is, but appreciate the culture from which it comes from. Which, I mean, a lot of American film history, you know, we were all there for. I mean, I anything that predates 1982, of course, I didn't happen to personally live through. But a lot of it I was there for. And, you know, I gotta say, is Peter Venkman a good person? No. He's a terrible, terrible person. From my point of view today, if Peter Venkman was my friend, I would have probably punched him in the mouth. And I've only ever punched one person. And that guy didn't deserve it. I apologize to that guy. But is he funny? Is Ghostbusters a good movie? Yes. Is it a product of his time? Absolutely. And, you know, judging it by today's standards, are there things in it, attitudes towards women and, you know, notwithstanding, I mean, can we find problems with it? Yes. Is it still a good movie? Yes. Is it still funny? Yes. Is it still entertaining? Yes. So, there is a lens that we can view the world, and we can narrow it or widen it as much as we want. We can judge things by today's standards and hate them, or we can widen our lens and look at things by the era that were recreated, acknowledge the problems with them, and continue to be entertained by them. Start a dialogue, right? Let's not stop watching Waiting. Let's laugh at the things that are funny about it and talk about why, you know, maybe some of the things don't hold up. Let's see how far we've grown, where we've come from, and where we have yet to go. That's just my, you know, humble opinion. I love you guys. I'll talk to you hopefully sooner than later, but the holidays are coming up, so good chance there won't be this until after the new year. But I bought a microphone's not done. We're just not on a regular schedule anymore. Anyway, I love you guys. I'll talk to you soon.
Where are you headed, cowboy?
Nowhere special.
Nowhere special. I always wanted to go there.
Come on.